Hello. Uh, so I am traveling. I am in Brazil, but I'm going to try to keep up with the readings regardless. And we're going to continue reading Humano Genus from Pope Leo XIII. And we finish on part 1, if you haven't watched, the 12 first paragraphs. So I'm going to start with the 13th. Just a recap on the 12th paragraph, we talk about how the fundamental doctrine of the naturalist is guided by the human nature and human reason, and how that is different from the true Catholic doctrine. So let's see how this works. Hopefully, I don't think anybody's meant to come home right now, so I have this time to read it. In those matters which regard religion, let it be seen how the sect of Freemasons acts, especially where it is more free to act without restraint. And then let anyone judge whether, in fact, it does not wish to carry out the policy of the naturalists. By a long and persevering labor, they endeavor to bring about this result, namely, that the teaching office and authority of the Church may become of no account in the civil state, and for this same reason they declare to the people and contend that the Church and state ought to be altogether disunited. So the whole concept, and now it's my intake, of church and state that we have now, the idea that they need to be separate, that's the root, that's where it comes from, right? From this naturalist mentality that is not the Catholic doctrine. Continue. By this means they reject from the laws and from the commonwealth of wholesome influence of the Catholic religion, and they consequently imagine that states ought to be constituted without any regard for the laws and precepts of the Church. Paragraph 14th. Nor do they think it is enough to disregard the Church, the best of guides, unless they also injure it by their hostility. Indeed, with them it is lawful to attack with impunity the very foundations of the Catholic religion, in speech, in writing, and in teaching. And even the rights of the Church are not spared, and the offices with which it is divinely invested are not safe. The least possible liberty to manage affairs is left to the Church. And this is done by law, not apparently very hostile, but in reality framed and fitted to hinder freedom of action. Moreover, we see exceptional and onerous, which means burden, laws, so burden laws imposed upon the clergy, to the end that they may be continually diminished in number and in necessary means. We see also the remnant of the possessions of the Church, shackled by, or the word they use is fettered, by the strictest conditions and subjected to the power and arbitrary will of the administrators of the state and the religious orders rooted up and scattered. Paragraph 15. But against the Apostolic See and the Roman Pontiff, the contention of these enemies has been for a long time directed. The Pontiff was first, for special reasons, thrust out of the bulwark of his liberty and of his right. The civil princedom, which means jurisdiction, right? Princedom, soon he was unjustly driven into a condition which was unbearable because of the difficulties raised on all sides. And now the time has come when the partisans of the sects openly declare what in secret among themselves they have for a long time plotted, that the sacred power of the pontiffs must be abolished, and that the papacy itself, founded by divine right, must be utterly destroyed. If other proofs were wanting, this fact would be sufficiently disclosed by the testimony of men well informed, of whom some at other times and others again recently have declared to be true of the Freemasons, that they especially desire to assail the church, which means to attack violently, with irreconcilable hostility, and that they will never rest until they have destroyed whatever the supreme pontiffs have established for the sake of religion. Let me read that again. They will never rest until they have destroyed whatever the supreme pontiffs have established for the sake of religion. Basically, in this paragraph 15, it talks about how this act, the Freemasons Act, will aims at that time, the 1884, to destroy the power of the pontiff, which is the Pope, and destroy everything they have established for the sake of Catholicism. 2026, we can see how they managed to do so. Paragraph 16. If those who are admitted as members are not commanded by abjure by any form of words, the Catholic doctrines, this omission, so far from being adverse to the designs of the Freemasons, is more useful for their purpose. Meaning, when Catholics were admitted to the sect of the Freemasons, they were not required to negate their faith. And it's more by design, because that will serve them a purpose by not asking them to forego their Catholic beliefs. First, in this way, they easily deceive the simple-minded and the headless, meaning the ones that are not careful, right? And can induce a far greater number to become members. So they would attract more Catholics to the sect. Again, as all who offer themselves are received, whatever may be their former religions, they thereby teach to the great error of this age, that a regard for religion should be held as an indifferent matter, and that all religions are alike. This manner of reasoning is calculated to bring about the ruin of all forms of religions, and especially of the Catholic religion, which, as it is the only one that is true, cannot, without great injustice, be regarded as merely equal to other religions, because they're false. 17, paragraph 17. But the naturalists go much further, for having in the highest things entered upon wholly erroneous course, they are carried headlong to extreme, either by reason of weakness of the human nature, or because God inflicts upon them the just punishment of their pride. Let me read this again. But the naturalists go much further, for having in the highest things entered upon a wholly erroneous course, they are carried headlong to extremes by reason of weakness of the human nature. So they go to extremes either because the weakness of their mind, right, like how they think, their intelligence, or because God inflicts upon them the punish of their pride. So would be as a punishment for being so prideful that God allows their way of thinking getting further and further in error. Continue now. Hence, it happens that they no longer consider as certain and permanent those things which are fully understood by the natural light of reason, such as certainty are. First, the existence of God, the immaterial nature of the human soul, and its immortality. So perhaps as a punishment or the weakness of their mind. As people persist in this naturalist way of thinking, they eventually will question the existence of God, the immaterial nature of the human soul, and the immortality of the soul. And we can see that clearly because now there are atheists left and right, and people question, do we have a soul? Do we not have a soul? What happens after death? This is all a consequence of man going into this path of naturalism, either because they lack reason and intelligence, or because God, as a punishment, allows them to go in that way of thinking further and further from the truth because of their pride. Continue. The sect of Freemasons, by similar course of error, is exposed to these same dangers, for, although in a general way they may profess the existence of God, they themselves are witness that they do not all maintain this truth with the full assent of the mind with a firm conviction. Neither do they conceal that this question about God is the greatest source and cause of discords among them. So, already in the 1884, we see that within the sects of the Freemason, the question, does God exist or not, exists. If we go back to Clement XII encyclical, one of the requirements to enter to be part of the Freemason sect was to believe there is a creator. Now, over 100 years later, it's already allowed to question that. So just to note that. So not all Freemasons believe that there is a creator. Some do, some don't. In fact, it is certain, now continue, that a considerable contention about this same subject has existed among them very lately. But, indeed, the sect allows great liberty to its votaries, to those that vote, right? So that to each side is given the right to defend its own opinion, either that there is a God or that there is none. And those who obstinately contend that there is no God are as easily initiated as those who contend that God exists, though, like the pantheists, they have false notions concerning him, meaning God, all which is nothing else than taking away the reality while retaining some absurd representation of the divine nature. Paragraph 18. When the greatest fundamental truth has been overturned or weakened, it follows that those truths also which are known by teaching of nature must begin to fail, namely that all things were created by the free will of God the Creator, that the world is governed by providence, and that the souls do not die, that to this life of man upon the earth there will succeed another and everlasting life. So here in paragraph 18, we see that by continuing this era of naturalism and going deeper in the error, other questions began to surface. One is about everything was created by the free will of God, that the world is governed by providence, and that the soul does not die but succeed to another eternal life. So as it crumbles on the top, everything else starts to crumble. Paragraph 19. When these truths are done away with, which are as the principles of nature, and important for knowledge and for the practical use, it is easy to see what will become of both public and private morality. We say nothing of those more heavenly virtues, which no one can exercise or even acquire without a special gift and grace of God, of which necessarily no trace can be found in those who reject as unknown the redemption of mankind, the grace of God, the sacraments, and the happiness to be obtained in heaven. We speak now of the duties which have their origin in natural probity. The God is the creator of the world and its provident ruler. That is eternal law commands that the eternal law commands the natural order to be maintained and forbids that it be disturbed. That the last end of man is a destiny far above human things and beyond this sojourning upon earth. These are the sources and these the principles of all justice and morality. If this be taken away, as the naturalists and Freemasons desire, there will immediately be no knowledge as to what constitutes justice and injustice, or upon what principle morality is founded. So here, I'm going to read it again because I think it's very interesting. Because again, in 1884, obviously being guided by the Holy Spirit, the Pope is talking how society is going to crumble in morality, specifically in this part. And not only he's talking about virtues, virtues will be non-existence, but because the higher virtues would be mainly giving as a gift of God, but those virtues that can be attained just by how naturally designed human beings are. But once we start disturbing the eternal and divine laws, because we disturb natural law, which we have been doing now for quite some time, it will be a crumble in morality in society as a whole. Okay? Continue. And in truth, the teaching of morality, which alone finds favor with the sects of Freemasons, and in which they contend that youth should be instructed, is that which they call civil and independent and free, namely, that which does not contain any religion's belief. So here they're saying, and the Freemasons do want to continue that morality, it seems, at least in the surface, but is out the religious belief being taught, right? Independent, free, and only in the civil aspects. But how insufficient such teaching is, how wanting in soundness, and how easily moved by every impulse of passion, is sufficiently proved by its sad fruits, which have already begun to appear. So in the 1800s, you already can see how these types of teachings, where you're trying to teach morality out the religion context, it's already giving fruits that are not good. Continue. For wherever by removing Christian education, this teaching has begun more completely to rule, their goodness and integrity of morals have begun quickly to perish. Monstrous and shameful opinions having grown up, and the audacity of evil deeds has risen to the high degree. All this is commonly complained of and deplored, and not a few of those who by no means wish to do so are compelled by abundant evidence to give not infrequently the same testimony. Paragraph 20. Moreover, human nature was stained by original sin, and is therefore more disposed to vice than virtue. For a virtuous life, it is absolutely necessary to restrain the disorderly movements of the soul, and to make the passions obedient to reason. I'm going to read this again. Moreover, human nature was tainted by original sin, and is therefore more disposed to vice than to virtue. For a virtuous life, it is absolutely necessary to restrain the disorderly movements of the soul and to make passions obedient to reason. In this conflict, human things must very often be despised, and the greatest labors and hardship must be undergone, in order that reason may always hold its way. But the naturalists and Freemasons, having no faith in those things which we have learned by the revelations of God, deny that our first parents sinned, and consequently think that free will is not at all weakened and inclined to evil. And this is spread in society everywhere. Okay, this idea that there is no original sin and that free will itself is not inclined to do evil. Okay, so just by changing this concept in society, we are seeing tremendous consequence. Continue. On the contrary, exaggerating rather the power and the excellence of nature, and placing therein alone in principle and rule of justice, they cannot even imagine that there is any need at all of constant struggle and a perfect steadfastness to overcome the violence and rule of our passions. So by having that belief that we don't have original sins, that we are inclined equally to one or the other, which we are not, there is no vigilance, I would say, perhaps, to overcome our tendency and weakened mind that is inclined to vice, right? Inclined to evil. Wherefore we see that men are publicly tempted by the many allurements of pleasures. Back in those days, the mind of man is already publicly enticed by charm, attracted to pleasure, right? It has always been. But we're going to see what he's talking here. This even made me giggle, because as I think that now the TV is bad, the Pope could see in the 1800s how already so many things were bad. So we really have come such a long way from where he was. If he was here today, he would be more than horrified. I mean, he's watching from the other side, but it's like, whew, if he could see it then, he's so disappointed now. So here we go. I'm going to start again. Wherefore, this is paragraph 20. Wherefore we see that men are publicly tempted by many allurements of pleasure, that there are journals and pamphlets with neither moderation nor shame, that stage plays are remarkable for license, that designs for work of art are shamelessly thought in law of a so-called verism, which is like just the new art, modern art, that the contrivances of a soft and delicate life are most carefully devised, and that all the blandishments of pleasures are diligently sought out, by which virtues may be lulled, caused to sleep. So here he's saying how at that time there was already enough distractions in the field of entertainment, perhaps, I guess I could say that would put virtues, like the virtues, to sleep. So man was already being programmed, to use more a modern language, to seek for pleasure rather than work for virtue. Wickedly also, but at the same time quite consistently, do these acts who do away with the expectations of the joys of heaven and bring down all happiness to the level of morality, and, as it were, sink it in the earth. Of what we have said, the following fact, astonishing not so much in itself as it is open expression, may serve as confirmation. Now let's focus on here. For since generally no one is accustomed to obey crafty and clever men so submissively as those whose soul is weakened and broken down by the domination of the passions, there have been in the sect of Freemasons some who have plainly determined and purposed that artfully and of set purpose the multitude should be sated with boundless license of vice, as when this had been done, it would be easily come under the power and authority for any acts of daring. This is important. Why? Because here the Pope already see how industry of entertainment, let's put it in a modern language, was going to slowly weaken the mind of man to be inclined to be dominated by their passions. Why? Because of a soul that can't fight their own passions and desires is easily controlled by those clever men, let's put it that way, and would come into authority of what those men tried to do. So by knowing human nature to that point, they knew that if they let human men and women obviously, but come live their desires and passions freely without worrying about what's next, right? That eventually it would be easy to control society, which is what we see today, right? Today we see, I don't know what percentage, but the vast majority easily controlled by propaganda. We see people being absolutely controlled by their passions and vices without even noticing. And then we see the rise of those clever men, generally speaking, in positions of power, directing where the society goes. So very, very good paragraph. Basically falls in line with the industry of entertainment being used as a way to control population. A summary of that paragraph. But now we're talking in the Pope wrote this in the 1800s, right? What refers to paragraph 21st. What refers to the domestic life in the teaching of the naturalist is almost all contained in the following declarations. That marriage belongs to the genus of commercial contracts, which can rightly be revoked by the will of those who made them, and that the civil rulers of the states have power over the matrimonial bond, that in the education of the youth nothing is to be taught in the matter of religion as of certain and fixed opinion, and each one must be left at the liberty to follow, when he comes of age, whatever he may prefer. To these things the Freemasons fully assent, and not only assent, but have long endeavored to make them into law and institution. For in many countries, and those nominally Catholic, it is enacted that no marriage shall be considered lawful except those contracted by the civil right. In other places, the law permits divorce, and in others, every effort is used to make it lawful as soon as it may be. Thus, the time is quickly coming when marriages will be turned into another kind of contract. Where we are living, so 1800s, 2026, this is absolutely true. That is interchangeable and uncertain unions, which fancy may join together and which same, when changed, may disunite. Which the same can, when changed, may disunite. So the whole idea that the civil union is even more important than the religious union came from this act, right? They proposed and acted upon while they were in positions of power in governments to make that a reality, which we live that everywhere, right? And that by turning into a simple contract, people can do back more than once and do and undo and do it again and do it again, which we see very easily nowadays. Continue, same paragraph. With the greatest unanimity, the sect of Freemasons also endeavors to take to itself the education of youth, 1800s, okay? They think that they can easily mold to their opinions that soft and pliant age and bend it to whither they will, and that nothing can be more fitted than this to enable them to bring up the youth of the state after their own plan. So this sect constantly had in mind that they need to have the youth education in their hands. And nowadays we can see that, and I can assert that even in Catholic schools, this is the prevailing mentality, because we have been infiltrated, and now the positions of power in the church are naturalists, are basically Freemasons. So continue. Therefore, in the education and in the instruction of children, they allow no share either of teaching or of discipline to the ministers of the church. And in many places, they have procured that the education of youth shall be exclusively in the hands of laymen, and that nothing which treats of the most important and most holy duties of man, of God, shall be introduced into the instructions on morals. 22. Then come the doctrines of politics, in which the naturalists lay down that all men have the same right, and are in every respect of equal and like conditions, that each one is naturally free, that no one has the right to command another. Let me start this again, paragraph 22. Sorry. Then come the doctrines of politics, in which the naturalists lay down that all men have the same right, and are in every respect of equal and like condition, that each one is naturally free, that no one has the right to command another, that it is an act of violence to require men to obey any authority other than that which is obtained from themselves. According to this, therefore, all things belong to the free people. Power is held by the command or permission of the people, so that when the popular will changes, rulers may lawfully be deposed, and the source of all rights and civil duties is either in the multitude or in the governing authority, when this is constituted according to the latest doctrines. It is held also that the state should be without God, that in the various forms of religions there is no reason why one should have precedent of another, and that they are all to occupy the same space. So now we are talking about politics. Now we are talking how men are to be governed by man, right? Because if we think, historically speaking, a few hundred years ago wasn't like that. Even kings and queens in the Catholic monarchies were under the power of the Pope, right? Which is the vicar of Christ, which is the representative of God. But now the Freemasons, by not creating because it came all the way from the Romans, but by implementing and the idea of republic, we have men governing men. And it changes and allowing things that perhaps wouldn't change under the laws of God, that wouldn't change, under the law of God, now can be changed because the human the humans like one thing now, another thing later, so it's not stable, right? I think we're gonna do one more paragraph and then that's it. Paragraph 23. That these doctrines are equally acceptable to the Freemasons and that they would wish to constitute states according to this example and motto. It is too well known to require proof. For some time past, they have openly endeavored to bring this about with all their strength and resources. And in this they prepare the way for not a few bolder men who are hurrying on even to worse things, in their endeavor to obtain equally and community of all goods by the destruction of every distinction of rank and property. And this is going to get into even more interesting things. So I'm going to put it here. We're going to continue on paragraph 24 next week. I'll do my best as I go, as I am not at home. So it can be a little tricky for recording, but let me know if you have any questions. We are basically halfway. And I think that's it. I hope you all have a very blessed week. Don't forget to pray, to do your rosary, and God bless you. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Amen.